So for a while now, this question's been rattling around in my head, like a coin in an empty jar, constantly clanging around the sides, demanding my attention. It's a question that has been asked many times before me, but one that continues to fascinate and intrigue me. Why are we so obsessed with certain stories? Why do we become obsessed? If you've ever read or watched a series, I'm sure it goes without saying that one time or another, you become completely engrossed in a story, unable to stop thinking about it even after you finish the experience. It lingers there, whispering that there must be something more still for you to gnaw on. And your curiosity is piqued as your mind sets up a corkboard and pulls out all the red thread. But how far are you willing to follow those lines of thought? You have a life, and these are just stories after all. Yet, come on, we all know better. These aren't just stories. If they were just stories, this wouldn't be happening. Or it wouldn't keep happening. I believe that one of the major components of storytelling and world building that is often overlooked is the idea of leaving gaps. Now let me qualify what I mean by gaps. What I'm not saying is that you leave plot holes or exclude bits of your world building. Instead, what I'm saying is that you leave openings for your readers to interact with the medium. Give them enough answers that they understand the story clearly, but don't answer all the questions for them. Leave just enough so that they see little tiny bits of lore like breadcrumbs that they'll bend down, they'll pick up, and they'll follow them into the dark woods of deep lore. I believe that this one thing is what makes the difference between a good story with good world building and those that end up becoming timeless. Now, with a personal anecdote, I noticed that when I'd watched movies with my uncle, who just so happens to be a professional velociraptor, or in not so cool layman terms, he's a philosophy professor. After watching movies, well, oh, the conversations we had. Don't worry, he's not dead, just contracted a bad case of moving out of state. And hopefully he'll get better someday. But anyways, over time, I began to notice that after a good movie, we would retire to the veranda, which was code that, he needed to take a smoke. We'd have a long, in-depth conversation, with each person giving their own different takes on the show or story that we had just gone through. These good stories would be one good long conversation, and we would be satisfied with it. But then there were the great stories. And oh boy, when the credits rolled, I was vibrating with marginally contained excitement. I knew what was coming. A great story always required a deeper dive than merely a casual watch. A great story had depth. It demanded more discussion and more debates. A great story was so much more than the sum of its parts, and we picked it apart, bit by bit, arguing and debating and counterpointing each other as we pulled and drew from the story and our own experiences, and then we found ourselves lost in its brilliance. Now, that's not to say that we didn't discuss these when we initially went outside with any more fervency than any of the other stories. Yet, the magic was always in the next day, or the next conversation. There would inevitably be a, "I've been thinking," or, "I had this thought." And just like that, the conversation was rebooted. It was given new life. More interesting still was the fact that a good story tended to have a general agreement among the group. Sure, there might be an outlier who just tended to see things differently, but with a great story, dear God, there was so much debating, something any good theorist worth their salt craves. Those stories, the ones with the gaps, those were the ones that had a certain magic to them. The writers having woven a spell that seemed to capture our interest long after we were done watching, or reading, or listening to. With another conversation sparked, it inevitably led to another, and then another, until we were reading wikis and watching YouTube videos, or really just doing any other kind of research that involved interacting with that medium. At some point, the conversations would die down, and we would move on to the next story. Yet, it's always there, and still is, this inevitability that someone is going to have a new thought, and there's going to be a phone call, or a text, and they're going to share it, and it's going to spark another conversation. Or, as in our group, a very fervent and energetic and excited debate. Like a zombie, the story would rise again to come pick at our brains. With that being said, I think one of the best things that we as writers can do is to learn to leave gaps in our worlds. Not everything has to be explained, nor should it. This invites the audience to bridge the gap, pun intended, and their imagination becomes involved. In doing so, your world becomes their own. They'll gasp, wide-eyed, as another dot is connected in their mind, and they'll have taken that one more step further into your universe, one that's far larger than they had originally anticipated. They'll rush to their friends or to Reddit, or maybe even make a YouTube video about it. Now, there are a couple qualifications to this. After conversing with several fellow Redditors, we were able to come up with several conclusions as to how lore should be handled. First and foremost, lore gaps should be strategic. Just beware that there is such a thing as tension fatigue, and yes, I'm glaring at you, Walking Dead. And in the same way, there's such a thing known as mystery fatigue. At least that's what I'm going to call it. This is going to happen when the audience gets strung along with a constant suspense building, and the answer never really comes. Or, worst case, the answer comes and it doesn't mean anything. It amounts to nothing. It would be like your parents building up this cool Christmas present that they're gonna get you, and the day comes and it's just socks. Plaid socks. The cotton kind. Ugh. In the same way, our stories should be like gifts given to an intrigued audience, and we don't want to piss them off by basically dangling a carrot in front of them and then giving them the stick. That's really not cool. I think where gaps should be applied are to things that aren't necessarily impactful to the story as a whole. They can be things that are impactful to the world, a little hidden gem that's given as a reward to the person who spent countless hours learning and researching about your world, that they can jump up and point and go, oh my god, I know what that is, and I know why it's important. It's those little tiny gaps that will reorient the person, allowing depth and layers of meaning to be added to the story. But be warned, leaving gaps for no reason other than to deprive the audience is just a way to frustrate and enrage them. Another point is that gaps work really well when there's small subtle things, like a little bit of a character's backstory that turns that wrathful glare into a pained grimace, or a small piece of jewelry that a person has that reveals a connection to a long-lost love, or something of that nature. Make your gaps be the more intricate details of your world. For instance, take games like Bloodborne and Elden Ring. They are jam-packed with lore. Their worlds just ooze it out with every pixel. These are phenomenal worlds that my wonderful wife just will not shut up about because she's fallen in love with them. Hopefully not as in love with them as she is in love with me. Please help me God. When thinking about creating gaps, we could liken it to the item descriptions that are in the games. You have the story, and you could go through the main storyline and have a decent grasp of what's going on. You wouldn't be lacking major understanding. But then there's the item descriptions. Do you want to know the deep story? Do you want to know about all the intricacies and small sub-stories that have been woven together to create the history of this world and have shaped the way that things are when you, the character, has shown up to play in this game? And one last note about writing stories is that you should understand that after you've made a piece of art and you send it out in the world, like I said earlier, that art becomes a part of the people who engage with it. It becomes no longer just your art, but it becomes a part of them. And so leaving gaps allows for them to interpret it through their thoughts and experiences and then share that with others. And in that way, really great stories are timeless and allow us to connect to each other in a way that normal stories just can't do. And just like that, it's like unlocking a side quest for your audience. You'll have drawn them deeper into your world and cheer them on as you know that they've only just started their journey. And that is what makes things like the Cosmere so exciting. What turned FNAF from a last-ditch attempt by a game developer who'd already given up on their passion into a colossal mainstream cultural touchstone that it is now. It's why Skyrim and Mass Effect will always be replayed over and over. So in closing, remember, writing and world building is what makes life worth living for us. It's an adventure, and what makes an adventure worth taking is the companions we meet along the way. Cheers. And those are my thoughts. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Please share your thoughts down in the comments below. Tell me about your favorite deep or hidden lore pieces, or tell me about a time that you discovered or pieced something together and the way that it made you feel. I'd truly love to hear about it. And so that I can appease the algorithm gods, please check out the story that I have narrated up above that comes from my own shared universe, complete with hidden lore. Alright, well, I'll see you next time. Archivist out.